This week's pick from the deep is Tron Legacy. If you're following us on social media, thank you so much. If you're not, you can hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Deep in the Plus, but not TikTok. Never TikTok. Tron Legacy was billed as a high-tech motion picture unlike anything you've ever seen before. Immerse yourself into the digital world of Tron as celebrated actor Jeff Bridges stars in a revolutionary visual effects adventure beyond imagination. Tron Legacy also stars Olivia Wilde, Garrett Hedlund, Michael Sheen, and Bruce Boxleitner. So come on our adventures, we go onto the grid and deep in the plus. All right, so this week we watched Tron Legacy, and you were not a fan of this movie from the beginning. Obviously, I'm a pretty big fan, so what's your beef with Tron?
I found it really difficult to get into. When I watch a movie, I want to care about the characters, and I kind of had a really hard time doing that. The movie starts out with a ton of exposition that is basically trying to explain to everybody what happened in the first Tron, since this sequel was filmed almost 3 decades later. Most people who were watching it either hadn't seen the original or hadn't seen it in a really long time, so they basically had to explain everything that went on in the first movie to watchers of this movie. And so you spend the first like 20 minutes just full of all of this exposition, and then you're plunged into this digital world where there's really only a couple of human beings. So it's really hard to find empathy for characters when they're not real.
Well, I'm not real. I mean, they're as real as Inside Out characters. I mean, it's not like that they're not real. It's just that they are different. So I feel like you're prejudiced against digital.
Maybe this is like the episode of Rick and Morty where it's hologram Rick, and he's like, don't hate on the holograms.
Yeah. So, for me, I mean, Tron Legacy was like a dream come true. Big fanboy of the original. And I think part of the reason I was such a fan of the original is when I was a little kid in like 1982, when the first one came out, there wasn't a lot of other like cool Disney movies going on. I mean, it was the era of like Herbie Goes Bananas and Fox and the Hound. And so they were doing animation, they were doing family comedies, but they weren't really doing anything like really super cool. So I think that's why I fanboy over movies like this and The Black Hole and even Condor Man for some parts of that. Because if you look back at those movies, they're not great movies, but they were what Disney had to offer us at the time. So if you were, a boy in that era, then like you're a huge fanboy of all of these things, and you see it all the time with Tron posters in Chuck, the TV show, and in the Goldbergs. So Tron Legacy coming out, I was really excited about the chance to see those characters again. I think there's a confusion for me about whether it's a sequel or whether it's a reboot. It does use the original characters. It does talk about what happened, and to your point, they do go back and reintroduce you to all these characters, assuming that you probably don't know who they are or why they matter. So there is a good deal of that happens in the movie, but it kind of is a reboot in the fact that it's sort of the same storyline as the original. You're talking about a guy who gets pulled into the grid against his will, and his whole job is to defeat the bad guy and to get back out. And so that's kind of the storyline of both of them. So in a way, to me, that feels like a reboot. I think this movie was amazing because the first one, it was a little slow. So for me, I'm like, this is an amazing movie in comparison to the original one, which I already liked. I feel like the reason that I would like this as a deep cut is that I don't think a lot of people gave this one a chance. I feel like it had a lot more depth than the original as far as the characters. And to me, it just felt like a really good movie that I think a lot of people have overlooked. But you've gone back to it, and you still stand by the fact that you're not a fan of this.
I do. So, interestingly, it's funny you talk about is this a sequel or a reboot, because I feel like your description of this being a reboot where it's the same basic storyline again. It's funny because in some ways I think you could look at Star Wars that way, that the sequel episodes, at least 7 and 8 so far, 9 hasn't come out yet, are kind of reboots in a way of episodes 4 and 5. You've got similar plot lines, but at the same time, they're clearly sequels because you said, he gets sucked into the grid to fight the bad guy, except the bad guy is somebody he created in the original movie. The bad guy in this film wouldn't exist if the original film didn't exist. So I would still strongly argue that this is a sequel, not a reboot. I also find it interesting because, this is all basically the whole movie revolves around finding Jeff Bridges' character, but he doesn't show up until like halfway through the movie.
Like Luke Skywalker and not showing up until the end of Force Awakens? Okay.
There are a lot of visual parallels to Star Wars in this movie too. But...
Well, and I mean, Star Wars came out in 1977, and this movie came out in 1982. It's very likely that Star Wars was the catalyst for this movie.
Yeah, and maybe the Star Wars prequels getting made were a motivator for Tron Legacy getting made.
We were talking about Star Wars, and they went back and they bring back the things that you love about the original in the new movies. The things that people remember. Light cycles were a huge part of the original movie and in the original video game and all that. So I think that the upgrade they gave light cycles was pretty amazing with the multi-level thing. And as a matter of fact, I was so excited about Tron coming to Shanghai as a ride with the light cycles that I almost wanted to book a trip to Shanghai just so that I could ride a light cycle. So I feel like that there's a lot of nostalgia behind this to me that's not there for you because you couldn't make it through the first movie either.
Well, and so here's the thing about both movies. They were both very technologically impressive when they first came out. I mean, the original Tron was very groundbreaking in terms of the effects that it tried to create, and so was this movie in a lot of ways. But now, looking back after several years have passed, I don't think it really holds up. And there's, to me, a really stark comparison with Star Wars. So the original Star Wars came out in 1977, and you watch it today, and I think it still holds up extremely well because the movie, while it was sci-fi and it had a lot of effects, it didn't rely on those effects to tell the story. This movie relies on the effects to tell the story. And as time goes by and those effects become more and more outdated, the story falls apart.
Huh. Okay. Well, I will say that you're going to keep trying to bring me down on this one, but I still love it. I still fanboy over this movie. I bought merch. I will buy more merch when Tron opens up at honestly, when Tron opens up the Magic Kingdom, that's one of the things I'm most excited about is there will be more Tron merch to be had, and I will be buying it because, again, I'm such a fan of it. I loved the music. I thought the Daft Punk music was great. I think the fact that they were kind of because of who they are, I think as a cameo was hilarious in this movie. But I thought the music was great. I thought the effects were great. I thought the fact that, they go back to the games, that he's learning the same way that Flynn learned in the first movie about the games. I think all that stuff is really cool. The recognizers are still in there. The light cycles are still in there. I think it was a great homage to the original one. I think it was a great rebuild to the original one. And here's the problem that I have, too, is that I think when Edward Kitnis and Adam Horowitz made this movie, they were fans as well. And they went back to this and said, all right, let's do the original justice, but make a really cool movie, for the next generation. And I feel like they did that. And I feel like had there been a sequel, maybe that would have been even better, because I think they had to go back and retell a lot of things, just like Force Awakens did. Had to go back and retell a lot of things to get you to where they needed you to be to tell you the next story. So Tron Destiny, that was supposed to be the next movie and kind of got shelved, and I assume just because of the box office for this one not being what they had hoped it would be. Cillian Murphy is in this movie, and just as a cameo almost, but he is Dillinger's son, and if you watch the first movie, he is, Dillinger's like the lead bad guy. So the fact that he shows up in this movie and he's in that board of directors meeting when they're launching the new software, and that's the only time you see him, seems weird to me because he was still kind of a big deal around this time.
This is the same year that Inception came out.
Okay, so yeah.
Inception was huge in 2010, and Cillian Murphy was a huge part of that. And I find it really funny, not only that he showed up in this in such a brief cameo, he was uncredited in the movie. Right. Cillian Murphy does not appear in the credits of this movie.
Well, and he was supposed to be a major part of the sequel of Tron Destiny. So it makes sense that he would have been in this just for a minute and then be a bigger deal in the next movie, almost like they were seeding it to say, here's something bigger coming. Jared Leto was supposed to be a big deal in the sequel and was still talking about it in 2017 as a possibility. So I almost think at this point, because it has been so long again, that they either will have to reboot or maybe it just doesn't ever happen. But that would be sad to me that this is good IP to me still. I mean, they ran a huge party in Disney's California Adventure that was electronica. That's what this shirt's from. And it was really cool. I mean, again, the Daft Punk music playing throughout the land, just the lights. They had Flynn's arcade. It was really neat. And I do still think this is very good IP still. And there's still got to be an option for it somewhere.
Well, it's interesting because I think you're totally right. It is a good IP. And it's weird because I feel like it's a good IP despite the fact that the movies aren't that well loved by that broad of an audience. And it's funny, like people still love and talk about Tron even if they don't actually love the movies.
Well, okay, so that's a really good point. And it almost seems like the iconic factor outweighs how many people have actually seen the movies. That people love the idea of Tron if they don't love actual Tron. And so, I think that there are very few things that are like that. I think that maybe Nightmare Before Christmas might be a little bit like that there are people who get into Jack Skellington a lot that may not be as into the movie itself.
You know what's funny, and this is probably a really hot take for some people out there in the audience, I would argue that Mickey Mouse falls into that category.
Okay. I could see that, absolutely, because before
People
Mickey Mouse Clubhouse on Disney Junior, every little kid knew who he was, and yet there wasn't a show out there. There was no Mickey Mouse Club. There weren't a ton of things in the park even other than meet and greets. That's a good point.
So can I share the other thing that I think is a total hot take about this movie?
If please overuse the term hot take.
I will. This week's episode is all about Jill's hot takes on Tron. So to me, watching this film, and you're absolutely right, I have no real love or nostalgia for the original Tron. I was 5 years old when it came out, and so it was beyond me at the time, and by the time I was probably old enough to watch it, it was already kind of dated. But to me, watching Tron Legacy today, I see Jeff Bridges basically reprising his role as the dude from Big Lebowski, because Jeff Bridges has become this Zen character in this movie. Kevin Flynn is this Zen character who's seen, you first come upon him and he's meditating and he's saying things like dude and man. And then you've got Clue, who is, I'm sorry, this Hitler-esque character who is basically taking over. He's become a totalitarian ruler of this grid world. He is cleansing it of any imperfections. He committed genocide against the ISOs, and now he wants to go out into the real world and perfect that. So to me, this movie is the dude versus Hitler.
Wow. Well, let me talk about the dude part first, because Kevin Flynn predates The Big Lebowski. And so in the original one, he is that guy. So I would argue that The Big Lebowski is actually just Kevin Flynn. But as far as the Hitler thing, I feel like that is not a new theme. I mean, I feel like that's a theme that we see often, is that juxtaposition of, I've been asked to create something perfect, but in you telling me to create something perfect, I have to create something inhuman, which will then go against humanity. And so, I mean, I think about that in terms of, and this is going to be kind of a deep cut, but like Futurama. In Futurama, the whole Santa Claus thing in Futurama is that Santa is going out against everybody because nobody's truly good. And so he's coming after everyone. So, I mean, that's a theme that you see a lot, but I think to simplify it is like the Lebowski versus Hitler is just mean, and I think you need to stop it.
I don't disagree with anything you just said, but it's still the dude versus Hitler.
So I feel like I know how you're going to answer this question, but would you recommend this movie?
I hate to say, but this is our first Deep in the Plus movie that I am not going to recommend. I mean, if you are a fan of the original Tron, then by all means watch it because I think you will enjoy it. I think there are a lot of parallels, as we talked about. I think there are a lot of fun callbacks to the original movie that fans of the original Tron are going to really enjoy. But for me coming into this as not a fan of the original, not having any real nostalgia for it, this movie felt, there were times where this movie felt a little tedious. It's 2.5 hours, give or take a few. And I felt like it was too long. The story was too convoluted. It was really difficult to follow. Visually, it was amazing. Musically, it was fantastic. I completely agree. Daft Punk was brilliant. I mean, the soundtrack for this movie hit #4 on the Billboard charts, so that says something right there. There are absolutely redeeming parts of this movie, but overall, for me, with so many other things out there on Disney Plus to watch, this is way down on the list for me. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings with that.
You've hurt my heart. Because I would still recommend it, and I would still argue that, you mentioned the music again. The music is great, and I think it's very, again, iconic. I think that, we see it used in, in the night show at Hollywood Studios, and you see, we're going to have a great attraction at Magic Kingdom with this music and this IP. If only for that, I think that anybody who is a Disney fan should see this movie just so they know what they're getting into when that attraction opens, because I think you'll enjoy it at a whole nother level. But I also think this movie is not as bad as you say it is. But that's your opinion, and you get to have one. But you also said 2.5 hours, and it was 2 hours and 7 minutes. So it may have just felt longer to you because of you not enjoying the movie, which, I totally understand. But I do love Tron. I do. That's just, so. I mean, I'm going to be a little bit biased, obviously, from the beginning, but I do think it's an important part of Disney, is that this is one of their IP that they still use and they still celebrate. And if you haven't seen this movie, I think that you owe it to yourself to spend the 2 hours and 7 minutes to watch it and see for yourself what you think. But I'd love to hear comments from anybody who hasn't seen it, who then comes back and watches it. I would love to hear your comments and what you think about it. You can hit us up on @DeepInThePlus on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or comment on the YouTube comments below. But I would love to hear somebody come back and go, you know what? We watched it and you're right, you needed to see this one and we enjoyed it, because that's really, what we want to do, is we want to point people in the right direction. And so in this one, we're a little bit torn, but I think it's one that people will enjoy. All right, Jill, so give me some good news. What's your deep pick of the week?
My deep pick of the week is Quack Pack. So this was I know you're laughing.
I know exactly what you're talking about, though. I just it's so funny to me that you didn't tell me what it was going to be, and you caught me off guard, and now I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yep, okay. Exactly. So Quack Pack, for those of you who don't know, was a 1996 one-season-long animated series that was part of the Disney Afternoon. It was part spin-off of DuckTales, but also kind of more of an homage to the old Donald Duck shorts. It featured Huey, Dewey, and Louie as kind of adolescents, I would say, in like the 12 to 14-year-old range. And it's basically all about them and Donald having adventures. It didn't do that well, and it's not, the best show of all of the Disney Afternoon shows, but it's a lot of fun. If you're a DuckTales fan, if you're a Donald Duck fan, I definitely recommend it. And the best part is going back and watching it now, I think it still holds up really well. It's actually really funny to me that there's a lot of meta in this show. There's a lot of them breaking the third wall. There's a lot of them outrightly acknowledging the absurdity of what's going on. There's one episode where Donald becomes a supervillain, and the boys are tasked with kind of stopping him. And at one point, the woman who's some like leader or whatever who's trying to get them to stop him he steals everyone's TVs, and this leader woman is like, what would we do without TV? We're all going to have to talk to each other then. And it reminds you of how things are today with the internet, that, not that much has changed in the grand scheme of life. And so I think it just holds up really well. The other thing I love about it is there's so much good voice acting in this movie. So first you've got Tony Anselmo as Donald, the iconic voice of Donald Duck these days, and has been since I think the 80s. All three nephews are voiced by girls, which is, in the grand scheme, not totally surprising. But one of them is Pamela Adlon, who is famous from, she was in Californication with David Duchovny. One of the nephews is Elizabeth Daly, who played Dottie in Pee-wee's Big Adventure and also voiced Buttercup in the Powerpuff Girls. But then you've got all of this, these kind of really big names who will show up and voice a character for an episode or two. You've got, Jim Cummings shows up, so of course I'm a fan of that. Frank Welker shows up. Tim Curry shows up. John Astin, who was Gomez Addams in the original Addams Family. Glenn Shaddix, who was in Beetlejuice and Heathers, Dan Castellaneta, who was Homer Simpson, Harry Shearer, who is Ned Flanders in The Simpsons, Matt Frewer, who is Max Headroom. You've just got this incredible list of of actors who show up and play little bit roles. So it's kind of this fun little pop culture party of you never know who you're going to get voicing one of the characters. So I definitely recommend it, especially if you're a Donald or DuckTales or Disney Afternoon fan. You should definitely go watch this show.
For my deep pick, I was going to do Tron, the original, just because I feel like it's so iconic and it should be watched. But after we've kind of gone back and forth about Legacy, I think anybody who was thinking about Tron, the original, probably needs to watch Legacy first and decide if they're going to go back to the original. But in the vein of Tron, I'm still going to recommend some Tron for you, and it's Tron Uprising, which was the one-season TV show created by the same people who created Tron Legacy, Edward Kitness and Adam Horowitz. So it is a dive deeper into the grid. It is a kind of a bridge between the first movie and the second movie, where it takes place in a sector of the grid that we've never seen before, with a character named Beck, who's voiced by Elijah Wood. But you were talking about Dottie from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and Pee-wee himself is in this one. Paul Rubens is a voice in this one. Mandy Moore is a voice in this one. Bruce Boxleitner reprises his role as Tron, and in this one, Tron is trying to kind of lead Beck into being the new hero of the grid and trying to help him right the wrongs that Clue has created. So it follows along kind of like the road of Clue and the world that he has created in the grid. So it does fill in some of the gaps. It sort of is like a prequel to Legacy, and I think it's really well done. The animation style is very unique. It feels a little bit anime at times, but it was only one season, and I think it was a quality show, and I would have loved to have seen it picked up for a second. So that's my pick of the week.
If you like what you're watching, make sure you like and subscribe. You can also find us on social at Deep in the Plus on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you're a Disney Parks fan, don't forget to catch me and Rob on Park Center Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. on wdwnt.com.